One thing I left last year's conference scratching my head a little bit about was there was talk about change, but there was no real discussion around what were the influences of that change. What was causing people to go off and look at new workflows and new processes and new technologies? So we put together this event today to hopefully have some dialogue around some of the influences, maybe what our owners are asking us to do that they didn't ask us to do 10 or 15 years ago. Maybe what impact the economy is having on what we're doing. But we wanted to have a conversation around what are the influences, what are the changes, how do we manage change within our own organization. This is not about technology, it's about people. How do we convince people that maybe you've done something a certain way for the last 20 years, that doing something different is beneficial? When the benefit may not be to them. It may be to the owner, it may be to the architect, it may be to somebody else on the project team. So what we are going to do today is we're going to have 3 speakers present on their implementation, their reasons for change. Thanks again. I'm going to hand it over to Ray Miller with Balfour Beatty.
So as Stuart said, my name's Ray Miller. I'm the Vice President of Pre-Construction in Balfour Beatty's Atlanta office. And in between my day job, the other thing I'm doing is leading national implementation of a new estimating software system. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to come in front of everybody here today, just kind of share a little bit about what the impetus of that change was, as well as how we went about implementing the software, and we're kind of still in the throes of it as well, and then maybe some lessons learned, some things that I've learned as we've gone through the process. I'm getting kind of old. I've been in the business now for about 32 years, and most of those 32 years I've worked for really 3 major companies, some of the largest national companies that in the country, and so all of them had multiple offices. They all had different markets that they were in. They all were in different specialties, and so the implementation of the software system was always somewhat of a challenge to be able to match and meet everybody's expectations, manage everybody's expectations, as well as trying to work your way through the bureaucracy of a large company. And I'll touch on some of this as well as trying to get and maintain the momentum and the funding for such an adventure. So besides doing the very best that I can for my internal and external clients, every place I've been, I've always been someone who's wanted to introduce change and have an impact on the way that we do work, try to help the people that work for me, people in the field, just always look for ways to lean our processes and look for ways to have a positive impact on our company. And so when I joined Balfour Beatty 3 years ago, I came into our Atlanta office, and even just in the Atlanta office, we had multiple users using multiple software systems, if this sounds familiar to everybody. And so one of the first things I saw was the need there for a common estimating platform. And so we started implementing that locally, and ultimately then caught the attention of our CEO, and that grew into a national enterprise-wide implementation. So first things first, what led to the realization nationally that Balfour Beatty needed to make a change? A couple things. One was at the time we were bringing on a new CEO, Leo Quinn, over in the UK. He was tasked with kind of really resetting, level setting everything in the UK, and he started reaching over into the United States. And one of his primary directives as he was going about that was to try to search for standard operating procedures across both the UK and the United States, as well as looking for uniformity, things that would help us manage our risk. So we were able to, right around the same time that he came on board, we actually had set up I guess it was a national pre-construction summit, so to speak. And so we brought leadership from all of our divisions and all of our offices together, and we were able to kind of understand what each markets we were in, how we work, what was our workflow, what were some of the challenges that we had. And ultimately, I expected to find a lot of differences, and I was really pleasantly surprised to find that there was a lot of commonality as well. So the understanding of all of those divisional issues and the priorities really served then for us to begin to formulate the idea in our mind that we needed to have more uniformity, standard operating procedures, and the driving force behind that would potentially be one single estimating platform. So when we were there, we actually walked up to the board and we started trying to take a little bit of account of all the different software systems that we were using across the country. And it was pretty interesting. We found out we were using 4 different estimating tools, and that includes the dreaded Excel. We used 7 different takeoff tools, and we had 3 different subcontractor management tools. So I don't know if that sounds familiar to folks, but a lot of the divisions, as the company grew, had their own inherent tools or own things that they used, and they just kind of grew locally with using those tools. But it became very obvious, I'm sure you've been through this before, when, for example, you're reaching out, you have a client that calls you up and he wants to have a cost estimate in 30 minutes, and he wants to know how much a 20-story office building is going to cost. And so you reach out to all your different friends in the different markets to try to get some cost history to pull together that you can benchmark against or use as a cost model. And all you get is all these different estimates in different formats that really have no context to them. And you try your best to pull that together, use it for cost history, and deliver it to your client. So with that thought in mind and the realization, it was decided that it would be in the best interest of us, of Balfour Beatty, to have that one platform. And I call it a platform because when we were looking at it, we decided we needed to have a cost estimating tool. We needed to have a cost history tool, and we wanted to have a subcontractor management / pre-qualification tool. There were some specific things, the trends that we recognized in the marketplace and in the different marketplaces that kind of drove our decision making. One was really the evolution of pre-construction in our industry. I think that we realized as we discussed the different markets and the clients that we had was that estimating is really, and pre-construction is really not about accurate cost estimates anymore. That's almost become a common thing. It's expected, and it's really more about the varied skill set that you need to have at this point, and the varied tools that you need to have at this point to drive the entire process from soup to nuts all the way through procurement, and to be that advocate for the owner. And the truth is that today estimating itself is more about the expected accuracy that you have, but communicating it. It's all about how you're going to communicate that information to your client. So that was one thing that we realized that our tool needed to have, was something that helped us communicate in a timely fashion to help our owners make informed decisions quickly and consistently. We also recognized, and again, I'm sure everybody's up on this, but model-based estimating, utilizing the model to do takeoff. We've all sold it 1 million times in front of all of our clients on how we utilize the model, but we also recognize all the challenges of getting a useful model from the design team, and recognize the fact that there are certain applications you can use the model for to do good, accurate takeoff on, and then there's other applications where 2D takeoff is just as efficient. And so we wanted something that gave us the ability to really kind of flip between both of those. One of the other things was being able to have a direct link between those quantities in the model and or the 2D takeoff into your estimate. Another item that we talked about was target value design. We use target value design in what we do quite often. It requires kind of a continuous updating to our clients as we're going through, always referencing back to your benchmark estimate and your benchmark priorities. And so we wanted something that would help kind of facilitate the communication of that to our clients. There's always been, and this is another one I'm sure everybody's very familiar with, the continued push to reduce overhead, because we all know that pre-construction is just a support service. And, so we've all been asked to do more with less. So it was very desirable for us to be able to be more efficient and help our everyday user be much more efficient in what they do on everything from just takeoff to conceptual estimating. And then probably the last thing is, I'm sure you've heard the term precon. Again, this goes along with being able to be efficient and have access to cost history very quickly and easily. Especially for those of you that work in the private market, you recognize the fact that we're doing a lot of precon. It's part of our sales support. It's part of how we generate business, and it's something that requires a lot of cost history to be able to quickly and accurately respond to our clients. And that was another thing that we really were specifically looking for in a new estimating tool. Once we decided that we were going to move forward, we really wanted to focus on, all right, we want an estimating software system. What defines success for Balfour Beatty in implementing a new software system? When we're all done, what does it look like? And I'm going to read some of these to you. Sorry, couldn't memorize them all. So, again, just high level. It provides internal and external clients uniformity of unit cost, scope, cost history, reporting, and communication across the enterprise by using one standardized software tool with the flexibility to respond to divisional and market-based needs. That was kind of our overall overarching thesis, so to speak, or main goal for the implementation of the new software system. And that was something that those words really were successful and very useful in being able to communicate ultimately what our goal was as we began to change manage this up to the executive level. Some of the other specific goals that we had for the system, again, we wanted to utilize a standardized cost database across all of the divisions, all of the offices. And that's a huge undertaking, especially considering that everybody's in multiple markets, to anywhere from healthcare to K-12 to public work, private work. We across the country, we really kind of are involved in just about every one of those types of markets. So we also were really interested in being able to utilize assemblies with one single cost database to be able to make it more efficient to enter the data into an estimate. So I'll talk a little bit more about the vision and how we really are utilizing that national cost database, because I know sometimes that could be something that when we first brought that up, a lot of people on our leadership team were kind of like, oh no, I don't want to be tied to something that Atlanta's doing. So, but it's interesting as we started working through the evolution of that, how we came to a resolution and that we think's pretty exciting. Another item is we want this to serve as a foundation for a national database that captures and reports all of our national cost history and all the project attributes attributing to, or actually facilitating a much more efficient cost modeling, benchmarking, and conceptual estimating that we do across the business. Again, we have this data, we have all these projects. So, our Dallas office is doing over $1 billion worth of work a year, but to access it right now, it's in 3 or 4 different estimating tools, and it spans over a long duration of time. And to get the data and to be able to quickly utilize it and benchmark it is difficult, because it's difficult to understand the attributes and the context around each one of the cost history that you're getting. Another goal, want to significantly advance the use of model-based estimating in Balfour Beatty. We all recognize that model-based estimating is the direction of the industry. It's been the direction of the industry. We continue to try to work towards the holy grail of being able to get quantities quickly and easily out of that. But the goal would be that if we can begin to, at least on our everyday user, access the model, utilize portions of the model as appropriate to efficiently get the data, and link that model to cost, and be able to efficiently update the estimate as the model's changing on those specific systems, that would be very much a win for us. Another thing was, again, I talked about all the different tools that we were using. One single estimating tool really would allow us then to leverage the procurement scale, eventually eliminate all the multitude of the licenses and everything else that we have across the business. And I think that once our CIO heard a lot of the talk about that, that perked her up, and we started to get her interested as well. And finally, we really wanted to pursue significant increases in efficiencies. And I think that this is something that we were very interested in. Again, just like everybody, we continue to be asked to do more with less. Pre-construction is being asked to be a differentiator in the industry. So it's specifically important that we're efficient in the way that we respond to our internal and our external clients. User efficiency increase of having an integrated tool where we're using one tool, things are talking to each other, and as things are being updated, the model, the cost, both of those things work in both directions, and you can visually show that to your clients. Time saved in entering data. Again, we had folks, we have 4 different estimating tools. Some folks were just using Excel, and you're recreating the wheel. And if you really can create that national cost database, assemblies, efficient ways to get data from a database into an estimate, you're increasing that efficiency. You begin to build, you begin to build models, you begin to build templates and those types of things that really makes it much more efficient for your everyday user to access the data. Reporting, efficiency in reporting. We all spent a lot of time in Excel trying to create summary level reports, cross-tab reports to clients, and that can take hours sometimes to get them right, and it seems like every single time you're kind of reinventing the wheel depending on the client. And so it was very important for us to be able to have, to be efficient in creating those reports. Also comparing and doing, comparing estimates, comparing prior estimates, benchmarking against prior estimates, doing your variance reports, and being able to communicate that live in a timely fashion with your clients is something very important to us. And again, that was an efficiency thing. People spend a lot of time doing the variance reports. You have your comment column up on the right-hand side, and you're always trying to figure out why things change, what it's changed by, and what's driving that on a summary level, and how can you quickly drive down to a detail level to really get a better understanding of what's driving that cost. So the ability to work in the same estimate by multiple estimators. Again, it's another efficiency gain. That was something that we wanted to see. Right now, in a lot of the tools that we're using, we didn't have that ability to do that, and we were merging a lot of estimates. Lead estimator didn't have an opportunity to really understand exactly where he was until everybody was done with everything, their sub-estimates. You merged them together and you had an opportunity to take a look at them. So all of those efficiency gains were things that we were specific about as we went through this process, and they were a requirement for us, that, again, to call that a success, to find a tool that would be able to do that for us. And it also, those efficiency gains, being able to communicate that up to the next level, up to the executive level, as we're trying to sell and maintain momentum up at that level. Those efficiency gains mean a lot. It means dollars. It means doing more with less. And at the end of the day, we really wanted to evolve this estimating tool into a differentiator for Balfour Beatty. So if we had something that could do all of these things I just talked about, that had all of these tools available to us, we feel like it would be a differentiator for us in Atlanta, as well as across the country. So once we decided and we came up with all of our goals for the project, the next step was really, how do we go about implementing this change? And coming out of that national level meeting, one of the most important things I feel like we did was we created what we call a project charter. And this project charter really is nothing more than a plan that talks about all of the things I just went over, but it helps coalesce everything into one document. It helps you sell it to your everyday user. It helps you sell it to your executive level team. It helps you gain momentum internally to be able to get backing and maintain momentum for this implementation as you work through it. You know, typical implementation, I've been involved in 3 of them on a national level, and they typically take anywhere from 6 months to a year to do. And to maintain that level of momentum is constant change management. So this project charter, some of the things that I think are really important that we have in here, there's some things that I want to share with you. One is we focus on the very first thing, project objectives. What is this initiative about? Simply, it's about to implement a single uniform estimating software platform across the enterprise. And so why is it critical to Balfour Beatty? What does that initiative mean to Balfour Beatty? These are all things that we had in our project charter, and this is really what you utilize then to gain attention of, again, your everyday user and your executive level leadership. It's very important then that you begin to put together an organization chart. What does your project team look like? In here, we actually just did a simple chart. I'm sure, I know you can't see it, but just half, 3/4 of a page. But what the most important pieces of it is that you identify executive level leadership. 2 things that we did that I felt were very important was we got the CIO, someone high level on our IT side, to be part of the executive level leadership to help us through the implementation piece, the technical implementation piece of the system. And then even more important was I was able to identify a chief operating officer of our Southeast region to be my executive sponsor to be able to help, sell it, maintain it, and push it through our executive leadership team as we began to understand everything from what does the change mean, what is the cost going to be, and what's the end product going to be. But identifying who that executive level sponsor was very important. And you make sure you put it right here on your org chart. The other piece, next level down, is your project team leadership. The way we set it up, we had a project manager from our IT side to help me facilitate working with our infrastructure side of the business, and also just to kind of help facilitate all the meetings and facilitate all of the conference calls and the daily grind of trying to get through it. And then we also had who the project leadership person is. In this case, it was me. So who's going to be identify who's that single point person making the decisions that you're, in our instance, that Beck Tech can reach out to when they need something and provide that higher level decision making. And then the final part of the organization, the team structure that was really important was, we have 5 different divisions and 12 different offices. And it was vitally important that we identified at least one person from every single office to be part of this implementation process. So in some cases, it was very gratifying. We actually had more than one person that was interested. So we wanted to try to keep the team small, flexible, but in some of those offices where everything, you know how it is, everything's very dynamic, you're very busy, sometimes it's good to have a couple people that are there that can flex back and forth. If one person's tied up doing something else, you have somebody else that's available to be on the call, on your weekly call, or to be part of an evaluation of part of the implementation. So we outlined who those people were in every office, and that essentially made up who our subject matter experts were moving forward through the implementation and into the rollout and the training. Another big significant part of your project charter is really what are your objectives, your sub-objectives, and your targets. So for example, you want to specifically go through and outline what is the scope of work that's involved in this implementation, and what is explicitly out of scope. So in this case, since we were just working on estimating software itself, it was, in scope, it was 2D and 3D takeoff tools. It was a standardized cost database. It was a national project historical cost comparison. And it was comprehensive baseline uniform sort codes, WBS codes, reports, uniform reports, and estimating templates across the entire enterprise. But specifically out of scope here was there was no bid solicitation, no subcontractor management as part of this, no pre-qualification, and no subcontractor database. And then you kind of want to move through to what are some of your assumptions that you're making. Again, some of these are schedule related. In other words, and a good example of one of the assumptions that an enabler here is that we want to have all of our divisions migrated to the Beck Estimator software by end of 2017. That was our goal. We want to decommission our existing tools by the end of 2017. Some of the enablers that we identified that were important for everybody to understand. Again, this is all about managing expectations and communication. Pre-construction and divisional leadership, you had to have buy-in and endorsement from everybody at that level across the enterprise. Participation by, I said it before, participation by all divisions, all offices. You need to have at least one person there representing their concerns and, as we go through the implementation. And then finally, a detailed work plan basically outlines your project deliverables, talks about a little bit about how you're going to break the job down. For example, we had a due diligence phase where we went and tried to understand exactly how everybody works, what's their workflow, who are their markets, what are their clients, what's their end products look like, do they have any costs for a cost database, what do their reports look like. We then had a configuration phase, which is, work through, try to understand, begin to build your cost database, build your reports, all your common sort codes. You want to understand, have a basic baseline estimate detail report. And then you get into your deployment phase, which is how are we going to roll this out and how are we going to train. And a couple things on the deployment phase. We're actually in that phase right now in our implementation. And some of the things that we recognized is from a training perspective that you realize that if you try to bring a couple guys from Beck and they come in and they do 2-3 days of training, that 90% of the room is going to walk out of there and they're not going to be able to touch the estimating software for the next 2 or 3, 4 or 5 months, however many months, because they're currently working on another project right now that they're not in a position to be able to make a transition from one tool to another. So it was important then to try and recognize that we needed to train everybody on a high level, but then have a subject matter expert there locally that's working with the local leadership to have actually almost a rollout training plan just for that office or just for that division. And so what project or projects are you in a position to pilot and pull a team together, a couple people that can really take a job, set it up, and begin using the new tool as you go through that local deployment. And what people are then going to ultimately need to be able to transfer over later on at a later date and be able to start either transfer into a new tool on an existing job, or when that job's over, be able to begin to use it. And that's why it's so important to have those subject matter experts there locally to be able to manage that local rollout that you have. And then the last thing we talked about was the support phase. Because you're going to have really a phased rollout, not just nationally, but each office is going to have its own phased rollout. You need to have a good support structure in place. And that support phase is what we have outlined. Who is the local subject matter expert or experts, and how is your technology partner going to help support you over the long term as you're beginning to roll that out to everybody in your division or office. And then, of course, the dreaded part of the project charter is the project cost part. This is where the CEO goes, "What? Oh my God!" So, no. One of the keys to really help facilitate the change. Again, we talked about we had 4 different estimating tools. We had 7. I don't know how many different takeoff tools. And really, we kind of took a look at what were we spending every year per user on each one of these tools. And if we can actually have one tool that can do all of these things, what's the savings? And so it was very surprising. We went through that cost study and presented it as part of this project charter. And you have your implementation cost, you have your licensing cost, and ultimately, from a licensing perspective, we were saving money as a company across the enterprise. We were saving money. So the only cost that we really incurred to be able to go through this implementation was the implementation cost itself, working with our technology partner, Beck, and then the rollout and training. And then also, as you kind of go through that, you start to, your implementation and the ideas that you have, they begin to evolve because you start to see what the software can do. And so you want to make sure that one of the things you do is you make it clear that there are potential for enhancements and evolution of your implementation that you want to potentially fund and need the support of others in the near future. So again, it spurs the creativity of everybody that is part of the implementation team, and they begin to think, it'd be really nice if we could have it do this, or it'd be really nice if we could do that. And these are all things that, when you take a step back, that would be a worthwhile investment, and you really try and continue to communicate that to your executive leadership and your everyday user. The other thing that we did was we created immediately thereafter a formal evaluation process. So we've created our project charter. We decided we wanted to have a database. So now this is what we did almost a year ago today, was we began the formal evaluation process. And so really you want to kind of start high level is what we did. We brought different people in. We had introductions from various tech companies, give us high level review of the software, what it does, just to give your team, you don't have to bring them in face to face. We did a lot of them as go-to meetings. But again, it was very important that we had everybody involved from all the different divisions, and just to try to understand what's out there, and again, try to get you thinking about what ultimately do we want this to be. So then we shortlisted. That sounds familiar, right? Get shortlisted, and you go through a formal evaluation. We didn't make them do a dog and pony show like they make us do, but we went through a formal evaluation then. So basically, once we shortlisted, we put together an evaluation team. Again, it was represented by everybody in every division. We put together an evaluation form that was probably, I guess, maybe 20 items that the team decided that they wanted to identify as specific measurable tools or measurable efficiencies that we wanted that tool to be able to give us. And so we created the evaluation form. We had all of those listed. We actually went through and rated everything on a scale of 1 to 3, and went through that evaluation with a couple of different software tools, and ultimately we ended up with the Beck estimator as the software that we wanted to roll out with. And it was interesting then to take everybody's evaluation form. What's nice about that is that you don't get a lot of peer pressure, that when people are doing the form, you're able to kind of do it all on your own. You can put whatever comments you want in there. You can evaluate what's the importance to you, and you don't have a lot of peer pressure of other people trying to make you feel like you need this is more important than this. And when we pulled all that together, we came up with one major, one condensed, summarized form, and it was interesting to see, like for example, when we were looking at the Beck estimator tool, there were areas where we kind of had it color highlighted. Everything was green, was great. These are all different, certain aspects of the tool that gives us exactly what we want. And there were other areas where, well, it does it, but it's not exactly what we want, and this is an area of focus. So we knew coming through that evaluation, what areas did we want to focus on going through the implementation with Beck. And what was nice is they were very, very, very open to that and responded very well to that. So I guess once you've gone through that that evaluation, then what were some of the lessons that we learned, some of the challenges that we faced as we started the implementation and rolled in and got into this into the rollout and training phase that we are. A couple of the challenges: one, anybody introducing change, you're going to realize that change management is probably one of the most difficult things about anything that you're trying to introduce into your company. It's almost as important as the technical side of things. It's almost important as having the tool do what you say it's going to do. Change management, both at the user level as well as the executive level, for someone on an implementation team, just managing those expectations, it surprises you how much you really have to work at it. Managing expectations, again, some people want to be able to have, okay, we bought the tool, let's roll it out, I'm ready to have it next month. And there's some offices that wanted to have estimator rolled out a month after we bought it and start using it. That's how important it was to them. But again, from a change management perspective, you need to be able to manage your expectations, manage the process so that you're communicating successes and you're creating success as you're going through the implementation to keep that and maintain that momentum. First cost of the implementation, the cost of the implementation, that's something that's a challenge. It's challenging to kind of communicate that upward, get the executive level support behind it. And I think one of the most the surprising thing to me, and I've seen it again in 3 different deployments that we've done, is you get lots of support from the executive level for the actual licensing and for that first implementation piece. But when it comes time to deploy and train, that's when they're ready to cut the cord. And so you really have to work hard for them to understand that the rollout, the deploying, and the training is just as important as the technical piece of implementing the software. And so maintaining that, managing their expectations around that, setting them up for the cost of training and support, and how that's going to be, how that's not something that you can just flip a switch and corporate can just take a new software and roll it out on your machine, and that's what you're going to start using. Trying to get them to understand that and support that is definitely a challenge. It doesn't matter what company I've been with. The timing, again, I alluded to this, the duration of the implementation. Again, it's not something that happens fast. Everybody has a day job. We have 12, 13 people on our implementation team, and it takes a long time to get things done and to get the implementation done. And so you kind of have to manage expectations around how quick the implementation itself is going to go. And maintaining momentum with your team. Everybody, like I said, everybody's working. They've got other projects that take priority. Maintaining that momentum with them, keeping them engaged, having weekly calls, showing them constant success, helping them be involved in assigning responsibilities. That's one of the key things that I think we did well here, was everybody on our team had something that they were responsible for. It kept them engaged throughout the implementation piece. Another challenge is that, it's taken us a year to implement the software since we've decided to go with it. And what's difficult is keeping up with the latest innovations that are out there. It's like, wow, I didn't, why can't we have it do this? So new things are popping up all the time. Again, it's about managing expectations, but also trying to keep up with the latest and greatest technology. And then I think that one of the things that you can do to help mitigate that is team with a technology team, like for example with Beck, an organization that really is proactive and will really support the evolution of the change. So by that I mean, as we've gone through the implementation, we've seen things that we wish the software could do differently. There's different, we've started off with specific goals and we've ended with some additional goals. And it's very important that you team yourself with someone who will really lay out for you, as part of their vision, what direction they want the software, they intend to take the software. What direction do they intend to go? For example, with Beck, the reason that we aren't rolling out a piece of a cost history management tool like a ModelLogix or something is because Beck is already, when we started this, they've committed to a cost history module that will be part of our software. And so we've kind of, from a schedule perspective, we've kind of put that cost history piece on hold, knowing that as we roll out and create the foundation of our cost database and our estimating tool, ultimately working with Beck, that's going to roll into a cost history tool that again is linked and reports through this, and it's all one system, which for us is a very significant. So I think just kind of to wrap everything up, how can you help implement change in your company? Really, the best change happens from the ground up is something that's very important. So, for example, again, some of us are part of big companies. We understand how corporate will roll out changes, and they just all of a sudden it appears on your email, and everybody's expected to use it. But the best change that I've been involved in has been like with our pre-construction leadership team making this decision. We've handled this all on our own. We've managed it all on our own. We've engaged all of the actual users from every office, And this has been a true ground-up implementation with very, very little corporate oversight, and it's gone very well and is being viewed as a success. Number two, identify the need and create consensus. Again, it's really important that you create consensus among your peers, that this is something that you need so you get backing and you get support, you get momentum for it. Create a detailed project charter, what I alluded to, or a project plan. It's very important to be able to do this, not only just to kind of outline and set goals and specific successes that you anticipate, but it's also very important just from a change management perspective and managing expectations to have something like a project charter. Focus on identifying savings and or efficiencies to be gained. So by that I mean, again, yes, there's cost incurred on licensing, potentially there's cost incurred on an implementation, on a rollout and training, but when you take a step back and you understand the efficiencies that you're trying to introduce into the everyday user, and you begin to quantify that and explain that to your everyday user as well as your executive leadership team, then that really helps, again, manage expectations and set expectations. And finally, again, teaming with an organization, a technology organization that's willing to proactively support the evolution of your change. And I think that understanding the direction that they intend on taking it and making sure that aligns with what your needs are is very important.
I'm going to bring up Brent Pilgrim, who is the Destiny Application Manager for the Beck Group, and Andy Leek, who is the VDC Director for PARIC Corporation. And they are going to get us kicked off.
So I'm Andy Leek, as Julie said. I'm the VDC Director for PARIC. I'll tell you right up front that I'm a recovering architect. How many architects do we have in the room besides this? We've got a few brave souls that have gone into the other side. So, I think Ray did a fantastic job of introducing a lot of this, and so I think Brett and I are going to kind of talk about a little bit more of hearts and minds and how we've approached the project.
I'm Brent Pilgrim. I'm with the Beck Group, and I'm going to try to blur the lines here a little bit. So my title has Destiny Applications Director in the Beck Group. I'm actually going to be wearing two hats for this presentation, so you get points if you can separate which points go with which hat. My first hat is helping the PARIC team as an implementation lead with Andy implement estimator for their company and their organization. And then the other hat is back with the parent organization, the Beck Group. My history is with Beck. I graduated with an architecture degree, much like Andy, and started working with the Beck organization in 2001. I've been with them ever since. With Beck Technology, I worked with many of you in the industry and your organization, so I've got a great perspective from a unique point of view, I guess, is the best way to say that. So.
Yeah, and so, PARIC is a St. Louis-based firm. We've been around since '79, work on a variety of project types, and with that came a variety of opportunities to see how we were going to roll in new technology. But before we ever got to the actual technology piece, we had to figure out who was going to be involved and where we were going to make those changes. And so, being the VDC director, an awful lot of eyes got thrown to me of, well, if anybody can help with technology and rolling out a new project, we're going to give that opportunity to Andy. And so I smiled and said, yes, we can absolutely do that. How much money can I play with? I'm kidding. So in all honesty, the first thing we did was sit down as a group and start to identify why we would even approach change. What was driving it for us as an organization? PARIC is a medium-sized firm, I would say. We're on the bigger side, but we're growing rapidly. And so with that, I think Ray made the comment about precon. We do our fair share of that as well. And so we had so many projects in the queue, and so many of them were requiring more and more information, as quickly as we could get it out. Almost to the point where we were starting to have to turn down work, which 10 years ago or 5 years ago, you wouldn't have thought that was even a realistic thing. So with that, we really started to drill in on where were we going to get the best bang for our buck at the time. But before we go down that road, I'm going to kind of back off a little bit farther here, and there is a point to this meandering. 5 years ago, when I came onto PARIC, it was about how could we start to utilize technology. So I was, as I said, I was in the architectural world, but on a day-to-day basis working with different types of technology, whether it was BIM related or visualization or what have you. And so what we started to do 5 years ago was lay out a grand vision of how we wanted to use technology for the company. You know, how it would affect us, how we may have to restructure a little bit so that everybody benefited from it. It wasn't about making spinny models and just having marketing pieces anymore. We wanted to really have an integrated approach to technology so that we modeled it once or we drew it once, and everybody got some use out of that along the way. And I'm sure that a lot of you have heard some form of that expression before at one of the various conferences. And so for PARIC, we're not necessarily unique in that, but we wanted to nail down a grand vision that we could accomplish inside of 5 years. So it wasn't about just saying we have BIM, we bought it in a box and we could use it. It was about how in the long term could we start to integrate it into our day-to-day culture of our company. And this is something that's really unique to the relationship that Brett and his team and our team at PARIC came to understand, was that culturally we had a lot of similarities in the way that we approached work, the way that we approached working together, and it was really about trusting each other and approaching things with a team effort in mind. So we had this expression in our office called hearts and minds. Everything we do is about hearts and minds. If we don't have buy-in early, nobody's going to do it. And we could spend as much money on technology as we want, but unless people are bought into that process, they are absolutely not going to do it. So dark conference room trainings and all those kind of things that we always fear, those are really farther down the road than even just getting the buy-in. And so I think that's something where Brett and I got together early in the process, and really not just Brett, but the entire Beck Tech team, was how are we going to get this off the ground first? And so I'm sure Brett has some thoughts on this as well. But I think that was the important part of us getting going 5 years ago, was what pieces could we shoot for that we wanted to accomplish. We wanted to use BIM in-house, that's great. We want to do clash detection. So there was all these things around virtual design and construction that had absolutely nothing to do with estimating whatsoever. However, because we knew we were working towards that, we were going to have the ability to use the models, whether we created them in-house, hopefully not, or more ideally, we were using the models that the rest of the team was developing together. So we were helping facilitate, and I'll tell you right up front, what our approach to using BIM in our projects is that we wanted to help the team by being facilitators, less than having to be in doing all the picks and clicks. We didn't want to recreate all the models, and we didn't want to go through recreating that entire process. We really wanted to be able to take what was already being done and just push it along. Let's further develop that information so that when we get to the end of the project, the owners had something that they could use to manage their project. So it was really a soup to nuts kind of approach. And so as we started down that path, we developed a 5-year vision, and that was about creating BIM, doing these other things around VDC, and now, well, I guess it was 3 years later, we started to really focus on how can we start to use that for estimating now. The early pieces were quantity takeoff. We could use Revit or some other tool like that and get some basic quantity takeoff. But that's just the 3D piece. There's this whole other 2D piece that's much more selective or capable, and it just depends on the project. So we approached it in a way that we wanted to be able to do estimating and quantity takeoff, at least at a bare bones minimum, the way that we could do it today. And so our approach, and I think Ray kind of expressed this as well, was, as you get going down the path, what could we accomplish in small pieces that would help us not only get some buy-in, but also help us get some success and some wins along the way. And I think that's where Brett and I really worked together about how are we going to do that and what pieces made sense when. And so that, once we get past the grand vision, it was how are we going to plan this specific piece.
Yeah. So I go back to the question that Julie had on the screen earlier. Why would we change? What is the impetus for change? And there are a lot of similarities between PARIC and the Beck organization. And I just think back to, back in 2004, 2006, when Revit was coming onto the scene really strong, and a lot of the architecture firms were making the case for change. and why this change to a Revit platform made a lot of sense for them. Back then, which was now 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot of, you would see that slide up on the presentations that showed productivity increases in non-farm industries. Do you remember that slide? That was ubiquitous in presentations back then. And non-farm industries were basically pointing to the construction industry and showing how we as an industry for the last 30 years essentially haven't changed our productivity. And so the architecture side of our industry was using that as the mandate for we've got to do this because it's going to affect our business. Well, parlay that over into the Beck organization, 1997-ish, we merged with an architecture firm and became a design build, what we call integration firm. And so for us, this pursuit of change really goes back to then when we've got to figure out how to work these two disciplines together better and more effectively and more efficiently. So Revit comes onto the scene. Of course, we had Profiler long before that. So, and really we have a culture of change, if you will. Test and innovate, test and innovate. We've spent a lot of money on a lot of shiny objects. That is for sure. And we've gotten better. We've gotten more disciplined about that. I would say that, again, going back to Julie's question, why would we change? There has to be a change in the workflow, a change in your staff, a change in your core business that prompts you to say, the way we're doing things today, is that the best and most efficient and most effective way to do things? Or should we be looking out into the future at something else that's coming down the pipe? And so one last reference to Revit. Revit came on the scene, and we as a construction industry started looking down the pipe, and we could see the train tracks. And way at the end of the train tracks was this headlight, and it was model-based estimating, right? I mean, we saw it back then. We knew it was a long way off because, as Andy mentioned, the models we got were never going to be perfect, and there's all these built-in challenges to getting a model and doing model-based estimating. But nonetheless, we all saw it coming down the tracks, and it's getting closer and closer and closer. So I guess to just summarize that entry piece about why do we change, we have a goal in mind. It's to get to this model-based estimating, but along the way, there's a lot of reasons to change and a lot of reasons to improve our process and workflow. So.
Yeah, and actually, as I start to think about what you're saying at the end there, the number one thing that we had to deal with as far as change goes is, as we're growing as a company, what is the number one thing that we need, which is more people. And I don't know if anybody else is dealing with this particular challenge, but there's not a lot of estimators just sitting around with nothing to do right now. If you know some that are good, come see me after this, because I would love to talk to you. But trying to get young or new people into the industry is very challenging. Experience doesn't come with a degree. It comes with years of experience, obviously. And so trying to find people that were interested in getting into the pre-con activities and really digging into that, part of that was saying that we have a great tool set for you to use to do that work. Quantity takeoff is so much fun. And I'll tell you right now, I'm going to poke fun at myself at this pretty much this morning. Just one, because you don't have to listen to me drone on, but two, because I am an architect by training. And so when I walked into the pre-con room for one of our first early on sessions to talk about, how are we going to approach change, and that I was going to be helping to lead the group, not just leading, helping to lead the group. There was obviously some strange eyes of looking at me going, what does an architect know about estimating? But I knew just enough to be dangerous and to help the group. So I think that was, to Brent's comment, one of the number one things driving our change was we were having a change in staff because we have attrition, we have people retiring, we have people that are moving on, they're getting new offers because obviously there's a resource strain right now. But then we wanted to get not necessarily fresh out of college, but I wouldn't say that we're against it. We're recruiting at even the high school level today to get people into the construction industry. But as it relates to around pre-con in particular, we wanted people that are going to buy into using new technology, using BIM, Revit, wherever the models came from. We're sort of agnostic about that. We just wanted the energy and the curiosity to jump into using these newer tools. And we all get good at what we do, and we get kind of, there's a potential to get set in our ways. So again, we didn't say we wouldn't hire one person over the other because of that, but it was more about, if we could bring people on and use this as a recruiting tool, and we do it right, that was going to really help us in the long run. And so we didn't focus on trying to get done per se in 6 months. We knew 6 months wasn't going to be realistic. Well, I should say we realized that a little later, but 6 months was not going to be a realistic timeline. It was really probably going to take about a year for us to get through that entire process. We'll talk a little bit more about the process, but what we wanted to gain from it at the end of it was not just a new estimating tool. I mean, we could have bought any estimating tool, but what we were trying to accomplish was a new process that built on our experience, built on the data that we had from previous projects, but then also to develop a partner. And in our case, it happened to be Beck. But the reason that worked out for us was because culturally they aligned with us and understood what we were trying to accomplish in the long run. And they were going to work with us and help us define. We didn't have every single thing figured out at the get-go. But by going through this process of reviewing everything that we had and looking at our staff and listening to them and getting their buy-in on different parts of it, that helped us to kind of even further define our goals as we were going on. Because there's your needs in the get-go to get switched over. And those, you have to be able to estimate, you have to be able to do quantity takeoff. Those are things you have to be able to do. But a year from now, we wanted to have some goals that we could start to really shoot for. Could we really use the model to get more of the takeoff done? Could we get more analytics? Could we really start to look at our history and use that to help drive some of our I got 20 minutes to get an estimate for a 20-story high-rise, or you said 26. So, those were our goals. Those were our long-term goals. But we had short-term needs that to roll out a new platform were things we had to concentrate on first. And so I think that's what helped drive our change. And that was, from our experience, that was what was really going to give us the benefit of going through a change like this.
Yep. So one final point, we can move on to the next segment. But you mentioned about new perspectives, and that can help drive change. Just a quick story. I remember in my first 3 years with the organization, I was on a huge project, and we were in a hurry. We were trying to do something, and I got a submittal approval letter and faxed it to somebody just about the time my project manager walks up and says, "What the are you doing?" "I'm faxing this submittal cover to Joe so we can You can't fax submittal approvals. You have to send hard copies. I'm thinking, what's wrong with a fax? It gets it there faster and sooner. So I'm just saying it was a fresh perspective. I was young and naive, and I didn't know that you had to send a hard copy. But it's things like that that can introduce cause for change. Well, maybe we should reevaluate this fax machine, right? Maybe it could help us do things faster and better. So there's opportunities for improvement.
Yeah, so I think kind of moving on to, we've kind of established why we were going to change, but how are we going to change? Ray touched on it, but how are we going to actually change as a company? Culturally, we felt like everybody was pretty pro-technology. They weren't afraid to try new things. So at the day-to-day operational level, we had people that were willing to take on this challenge and learn new tools or new processes. But it's not just about that. The hearts and minds at that level are really important, but there's also hearts and minds at our executive level and at our board level that we had to go through. And we were talking with Ray right before we got up here. He went through a similar process, except I think it's scale. His scale is a little different than our scale. But for us, we still had to get hearts and minds buy-in at the executive level. Why would we come in and introduce this change? We had done this 5-year vision, but we are gangbusters busy right now. Why on earth will we go and change while we're in the middle of doing all those projects? I mean, that you're going to take people off of active projects, active pursuits that are, of sizable scale. I mean, these aren't just small projects. These are campus projects, hospital projects. We can't possibly pull those resources for 6 months or a year and have them go out and be learning a new software and redeveloping a database and testing reports and all that kind of stuff. It's just not plausible. So we first went back to our goal. We always go back to our 5-year vision. Our 5-year vision plan. and say, this was our vision. How are we going to get there? And so the approach that we took was, who in our staff had the experience to help define a database? Certainly wasn't going to be just me. I'm an architect, again. I'm not going to have all those years of extensive knowledge around estimating. Who within the Precon group could really help us define what we needed to do in order to get assemblies and line items and reports and married up to our CMIC accounting system so we could roll books for costs and on the construction side. I mean, there's all these bits and pieces that we had to go through and basically review every single step. So we looked within the group to try and find someone who wasn't just a great estimator, but someone who was open to challenging the way that we have been doing things, understood the problems with the current system that we had. It's no secret, I don't think that we used MC squared for a long time. We were a 20, 25-year customer. And so we had used that tool over and over again. There had been years of refinement. I think when we started to roll the database, we had over 30,000 line items, and I remember Beck and Stuart, Stuart at Beck and Brent called and said, there's over 30,000 line items in your database. Do you really use all these? I don't know, I'm going to need to find that one out. And so ultimately, the point I'm getting at is we tried to find somebody in the group that understood our current challenges, was open to seeing how we could do things better, and was somebody we were going to be able to basically pull out of production and put them into this new role. So for us, and this is how it uniquely worked out for us, was we had someone that was within about a year or two of retirement, had a great history of doing estimates, successfully understood how to get through the entire estimating process in short cycles, was very high productive person. And so his name was Doug, so I can stop talking around him. So Doug was open to doing this. And so we sat down with Doug after we had nailed down all the other parts and pieces of this and said, we're going to pull you out of production on a daily basis. You're working towards retirement. We would really like your help in helping us execute this. Now, that just happened to work out that way for us, and we got very fortunate that Doug was able to spend his time there. But how everyone else is going to do that, I don't know that you're going to be able to find someone in your organization that's on their way out like that. But you're going to, in our experience, it seemed that having at least one person that had a good foundation in estimating that could understand our current challenges and how we work with each other. It's not just the software, it's how do we work together on our estimates. That person was going to help us drive that change better, because not only did they have that experience, they also had the buy-in from the group. So I can push technology and all those kinds of things, and that's what I was really good at, was helping to orchestrate the change. But within the group, we needed somebody who was also bought in by the rest of the team, that they knew how to do estimates and they understood those challenges around estimating. And I think that's where, between myself and Doug in this case, and Brent, we were able to put our heads together around what that vision needed to be and how we were going to go through that process.
Yeah, for our team, it really, the change revolved around a change in leadership. So our director of Precon is an enthusiastic champion of profiler to begin with, and now estimator. And that, Ray, you mentioned change has to happen from the bottom up, and I do agree. I would add to that, you've got to have it from every level. You've got to have it from the top down, the bottom up, and somewhere in the middle. Working with a group right now that has enthusiastic leadership in the middle management role. The mandate's been set from above that this is going to happen. That middle management's taken ownership of it and says, okay, we're going to do this. And then they've got talented, enthusiastic people at the doer or the execution level that are really making it happen. And so that's super important. And I want to echo what Andy's talking about with Doug. Our industry is in a unique place right now because of the blends of age groups and experience levels that are involved in industry right now. And we have such an opportunity to get everyone involved at this point. No one should be on their way out, at least involuntarily. And if they're on their way out voluntarily, we should find a way to get them plugged in. I can speak for myself at least. And there was a time when I worked right beside our director of Precon as a young estimator. And that year that I spent working directly for him was the steepest learning curve I've ever experienced in my career, and hugely beneficial to me And I would say, as a result of that, beneficial to the organization, because everything he taught me, I still have with me today, and the organization benefits from. So as an industry, as we embrace this change and this changing time, if we can figure out a way to pair up people who have 30 plus years of experience and aren't ready to retire or are looking for a way to ride off into the sunset. I'm not trying to make this sound depressing, but a way to marry these people with extensive knowledge and the heart of a teacher, really. There's a tremendous opportunity there for us as an industry. Our change has ebbed and flowed over the years. Our most recent impetus for change right now is a change in leadership, and now we have a great staff that is enthusiastic about the change as well, and I think that's a big component of it. So at the point you've decided to change, when do you decide to make the jump, so to speak? I think anybody that has experienced change or is about to experience change, you know that at some level you're making a commitment to work or operate on the bleeding edge, right? Now, again, I'll use my Revit analogy. I'm using this way too much, but there were organizations that jumped right out there on the forefront, and they were on the bleeding edge. They decided that they were going to throw AutoCAD out the door and start using Revit for everything. And did they experience challenges? Of course. So when you're on the bleeding edge, or I would say when you're on the leading edge, you have to be prepared as an organization to run into some challenges and run into setbacks. But that goes back to expectations, right? I mean, you set a certain level of expectation. When we as an organization are committed to change or committed to being innovative, we recognize that there's going to be roadblocks and hurdles. The first roadblock that comes up isn't the time to pull the ripcord and bail. That's the first of many times when you say, okay, this was expected, we signed up for this, let's figure out the way forward and keep on rolling. So I think you have to be aware of setting an expectation. Then once you've got that buy-in and you've got that commitment from all levels that we're going to spend the money, which is resources, time, effort, and energy, and people to do this, you've got to have a plan. And so I won't reiterate what Ray did a great job of talking about it, but you have to have a plan that helps you execute on that change, whatever that is. You get buy-in from her, you got a plan, you've proven it out through a pilot, then you go into probably some kind of a core group that helps lead the change. Probably at the point of that core group has to be somebody that's been given the I don't want to use the word authority, but has been, well, yeah, authority is the right word. I don't mean in a power sense. I mean authority to spend the time and the energy to help execute on that change, because at the end of the day, it's going to cost the organization some money to go through this process. So let's see. Implementation plan, people on board, and a commitment from the top. Would you add anything to that?
The thing I think that you touched on there was about running into speed bumps. How many people were in the pursuit of estimating software? I mean, obviously you've come to this change conference, so how many of you guys are actually in the pursuit of doing it? Okay, so the thing I would tell you is that it is not going to be all lollipops and rainbows, or lollipops and unicorns, or I've heard that expression 15 different ways. It's not exactly the easiest thing to go through, but if you nail down the plan and you really systematically go through and how you're going to build out your new platform. Once you've selected the tool that you're going to go with, you've found a vendor that's going to work with you, systematically going through and executing how you're going to rebuild that database, or if you're going to try and convert it all. I think that at the very earliest stages, you have to really understand how good the data is that you have and whether or not it's worth keeping. We had parts of ours that were great, and we have parts of ours that were okay. Certainly could have used improvement. So we really looked at it as an opportunity to go through and rebuild our entire system from the ground up. And in our case, because we had someone that could dedicate full-time to that, or almost full-time, we were able to do that at what we felt was an appropriate pace, if you will. So as we're going through and rebuilding those things, there was markers that we had to hit for milestones. We have to get this done so that we can nail this down. We have to get this marker done. Now we got this milestone accomplished. Those were all bits and pieces that we could consume with a relatively small implementation team. We're talking less than 5 people. And so for us, we wanted to be able to keep pace and ultimately have something that 6 months or a year from when we started, we will be ready to start implementing with the team that was going to be using on a day-to-day basis. Along that process comes hurdles, things that we didn't foresee, things that weren't a part of our original development plan. And I think the point that I'm trying to make around that is, as you run into those kind of speed bumps, you have to really keep focused on the vision and the goals that you've set up. I know some of this seems very obvious, but when you've got a team and you're trying to keep them all motivated to help build out line items and review assemblies and review reports and all those different things that you wanted to create in early on, and the things that you're going to need just to flip the switch and start doing estimates in that new platform, those MVP, minimal viable product type items, are critical to get right. I can't imagine if we had flipped the switch and had a hiccup with 20 some odd estimators, and all of a sudden we had made that mistake all at once. Not a mistake, but just not having had it fully ready to go. And so we took our time to go through and test every aspect of our new system to make sure that it absolutely worked. We lined it up against a previous project, did pilot projects to make sure, does this line item line out to this line item? So literally line by line, assembly by assembly. And we didn't expect it to be perfectly down to the penny alignment, but we expected it to be relatively close. And so we're in that phase now, and I think Ray's kind of in a similar phase there of going through and seeing, does it really work? What's not 100%? Because before we go totally live, we want to have it really nailed down. And so taking the time to understand that there's going to be some speed bumps in there and how you're going to react to those and keep the team motivated, keep their hearts and minds bought into the process is something that is absolutely critical to that project or to that process. And so for us, I think that's what's enabled us to be successful. And I will also say to the Beck team's credit, their integrity was shown to us every time we worked with them and we ran into any kind of a speed bump like that, because they would help us stay focused on what is the task at hand, how do we get from A to B. And so for us, that was a really helpful incentive, I guess, or benefit of our relationship was that they understood what we were going through, they were seeing it with other folks, and were able to kind of help guide us down that path. So, kind of a free click to these guys, but for us, that was extremely helpful in just making our way through that entire process.
I would just say the value of a core group, I think, is hugely beneficial because the core group can be your dedicated, enthusiastic, bleeding edge group. And if they don't deem something has passed the sniff test and is ready to roll out, they can be a barrier to a big stub toe, which is, have we chosen to roll out earlier rather than wait until something is right? You risk that heart and mind aspect of the larger group who hopefully is bought in at some level simply because the organization is bought into the level, but they have a day job and they're focused on X, Y, and Z. So when you roll this out, they're expecting it to have some level of polish to it at that point. So the core group can act as that insulating barrier and test group to help you really flush out the system.
This segment, we're going to be talking about how to continue to change and evolve. So one of the questions I'm going to ask the panel is, who should be your implementation leaders?
I think it's just really more about the type of person, not necessarily what level they're at within the organization. Because if you have the right person, you can always, that's willing to take the initiative and has the enthusiasm, they will automatically reach out to the people that they need to get the right information to be able to pull everything together. So I think it's more about finding that entrepreneurial person and finding someone that's not afraid that can think big picture and have connections to those people that can give them guidance on the big picture, but at the same time get down to actually trying to build their own database or take part in it.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, it's getting the person that has the right amount of enthusiasm to take on this challenge. Oh, there we go. Is going to make a big difference in the project. So it's being able to keep your focus on the goals of the project and not getting lost in the finite details that can trip you up. So that person can kind of move around from one phase of it to the next and keep all the things moving, all the balls moving forward, as they say.
Yeah, I would say there's the obvious project manager skill sets that come into play here, and then I would add to that that piece, that authority piece I was talking about earlier, and I'm not talking about power. Again, I'm talking about authority to spend the money, to spend the time. We were talking over here at this table about, you have your A estimator, your A team player estimator, and for whatever reason you chose him to be your implementation lead, him or her, and the next big project comes in the door and you have this tendency to want to pull that person back off of implementation because you've got this really serious pride. Well, we need that person's expertise. At some point, you got to be able to say, no, we made a commitment that this person's going to do this for the next, and we as a team have to figure a way to work around this current challenge of putting that person on our number one project or whatever it is. So,
If you could give the audience one piece of advice of what not to do, what would it be and why?
The one piece of advice that I think we would give is have a plan and don't rush it. Take the time it takes to get it done right, because this is the one thing, and I can speak for our organization, and I think most of you will be on the same page. We live and die by those contracts that we sign for those dollar amounts, and they better be right. So we want the process to work well. We want the system to stand up and do what it's supposed to do. But to do that, you have to have a really good plan and not rush it.
the most important thing would be not to try to roll this out all at one time across the entire organization, regardless of the size of your organization. Even within a small group, I would say you've got people on projects that are in different phases. You need a small core group that kind of charts the waters and leads the way.
My number one thing would be, and this is definitely a lessons learned from past, is do not let it turn into trying to satisfy everything for everybody. No matter if you're a small organization or a big organization, you have to set some specific goals that you're trying to reach, and make sure that all the decisions you make are supporting those goals. And don't stray outside those lines just because somebody in another city or another office wants to use Excel for this or Excel for that. You can't make it work for everybody, but it doesn't mean that you can't find a tool that's flexible enough to be able to work to try and find a workflow that is suitable replacement. And at the end of the day, it may be even more efficient than what they're used to doing.
During our conversation at the table, I asked my colleagues about how we can better prepare our students to be estimators.
Sophia, I'm a product of the Texas A&M system, and my undergrad's in architecture and my graduate degree's in construction management. And I say today, and the last 15 years as I've been talking to industry people, my number one best experience at Texas A&M was the capstone class, where for anyone who doesn't know, the capstone class is a class where they take the architecture, the design, it's an environmental design program. They take junior and senior level students from environmental design, pair them up with construction science junior, senior level students, and they do a semester-long project where the design team is responsible for coming up with a design concept, and the construction side of the team is responsible for coming up with the estimate and the schedule, and they have to work together throughout the semester, and then they make a presentation. Are we still doing that? Okay, that number one best class in my career, or in my education, because of the real hands-on reality experience that it provided. But to more directly answer your question, I do think we have to introduce some level of three-dimensionality into the program, because that's where we're going. The train's still somewhere out there on the tracks in terms of model-based estimating, and some organizations are doing more than others. But as a whole, we're not quite there yet, but it's coming. And so to some degree, our students have to be at least introduced to the language of 3D modeling. No, absolutely. I still think 2D is going to continue to be pervasive for sure, and part of our raw skill sets, if you will. So drawings aren't going away yet, so we still got to be able to read plans and do 2D takeoff and that kind of thing. So.
You can never underestimate the need for the contractual arrangements to be just right, the time you're brought on board to be just right, and the architectural team to be just right to be able to capture a Revit model and be able to capture all of the quantities in it and do it as efficiently as you can in a 2D takeoff in certain systems. And I think that moving forward in the industry, as 3D continues to be more prevalent and continues to play a bigger role in what we do, just doing straight takeoff and linking elements to an estimate, and just the way the industry's set up right now is not inherent to making that as efficient as possible, and it's all really about being efficient.
As it relates to being in school, you know, a big part of being in school is becoming aware of things that you don't even know exist. So whether it's Revit or any other platform, at least getting them involved in what that process looks like and why it's important. You know, we talk about WVSs and all this other, these other terms or these acronyms for things, but until they actually go through and they use it once or twice to kind of experience it, they don't even realize why it's important. And so as an architect, we start harping on the quality of the model, or as a contractor, we start harping on the quality of the model.
Yeah.
The reason we're harping on it is because either it's not, you know, assembled correctly, or it's lacking information, or so on. So, you know, the tool's somewhat agnostic, but the process is still really important.
Yeah, and I'd say the advice still remains, from my perspective, from an old guy, get out in the field and do some time in the field before you decide that pre-construction is the way that you want to go.
Good point.
Yeah, you know, within our organization, kind of a sideline from this, but one of the things that we've been really pushing hard is to have some of our younger staff come in, and they may go into precon first, or they may go straight to the field for a year, and then we switch them in and out over the first few years of their career, so that they get that exposure. Because, you know, when they're trying to estimate it in the virtual world, and then they go out and they say, oh, so there are form boards and all this other stuff that make it, and there's heat in the winter, why would you have that? You know, when they get to go out there and they live it for a year and they freeze their butt off in a high-rise downtown, they go, oh, I get it. So they don't have to be taught that lesson twice.
How you guys dealt with being architects, Andy and Brent? How have you dealt with trying to get them to understand how we're using their models, how we're interrogating their models? Most of them really freak out when they realize what we're doing with their models, but, you know, how are they reacting, and what kind of changes have you seen, you know, them wanting to really be part of the process?
Well, I'll speak specifically to Beck's integration process, because we have our own people are our own architects. Now, we do third-party work as well. You know, our group is working hard to create workflows and training that talk about the model. Hey, if we're going to move to model-based estimating, this is what we need in the model. And that's an ongoing conversation, and we've been doing this for 20 years, and we're still not there yet. So that just tells you how far we have come and how far we have to go still. But it's an ongoing conversation, and we have to train, and we have to talk about this. You know, I had this conversation last week. I brought the model in, and it didn't have X, Y, and Z. So if I were to rely on this model 100% for my estimate, we'd be up a creek. And here's why: because I need this area, and I need this slab, and I need these columns, whatever those components are. So it's just an ongoing conversation. We've got to train each other. I got to learn from them about why do they not want to spend the time to model X, Y, and Z. There's probably a very valid reason. That's a two-way conversation. But for a firm that relies on that as our foundational business model, we've got to eventually start talking the same language.
For us, it always goes back to educating everybody who's going to be involved in that process. And I would have thought 5 years ago that we would have kind of gotten past that hurdle at some point, and it would just become the day-to-day, and it's not. We still spend a lot of time removing fear, educating on the process, why it's important. We try to seed that as early into a project as we can. We try to do it with the owners or the client when we can. We work on a variety of project types, so sometimes that's easier, sometimes that's harder, you know, whether it's a hard bid or design build or what have you. We work in a variety of contract types, so you don't always have that opportunity to get in front of the right person and make your case on why it needs to be a really important part of the coordination process and the construction process. So, you know, when we can, we try to insert it early. And, you know, with the architect in particular, since you brought that part up, we try to build partners with the architects. We do a fair amount of projects where we have repeat business, when we're going to use similar, maybe not the entire design team's the same, but at least it's the same architect or the same mechanical or what have you. so we try to build long-term relationships with them so that they can see it from soup to nuts one time, and then we go to the next project. We don't have to start all over, and we kind of build on those successes. And that really has been the impetus for a lot of some of our big successes, is just getting that buy-in. And I will tell you that we get thrown every kind of waiver or whatever, whatever kind of contractual, I'm not required to make my model perfect for you. You know, we pick our battles. Some jobs it's worth really pushing for more. Some jobs it's not. And we have to take that on a business case basis.
Yeah, I think
That
a lot of
happens.
it has to do with the market that you're in. If you're doing healthcare work like Robinson Morton or higher education, you have a little bit different client type who's willing to invest in that with that architect and invest in the time to make sure that your BIM plan is right, have the right contractual arrangement that allows the architect then to have the time, a little bit of flexibility to respond to the needs of the contractor. If you're doing a high-rise residential building downtown Atlanta and you got a developer and all he cares about is getting that cost per room down, he does not care one bit whether I'm using the BIM model or I'm using 2D takeoff. All he cares about is that I turn an estimate around as quick as possible and that I give him the best price. And so his contractual arrangement is, like, for example, we are just topping out a 30, 40-story tower in downtown Atlanta that the architectural firm is just starting to use Revit for the first time. So it just depends on what market you're in, I think, as to, again, it's all about, we talked about it before, but managing expectations.
I come from a different perspective. I work for architects doing estimates as an in-house estimator. And we feel like the contractors need to come along with us. In other words, before we can get our drawings much better, we need your information. And we seldom get to draw you in soon enough to help.
You hit the problem. We don't get access. Many times we're brought in so late, and then there's no, we see more and more RFPs using the IPD and collaborative and all this other stuff, but when you get the job and you get into it, it's not that. And that's the problem. I feel like I'm working on a different side of the wall from the design team. So we suffer the same frustrations.
Yeah, I think in order for us to, the scenarios that we've had the best opportunities to work in relative to success in pre-construction, specifically around model-based estimating, has always been design build. Just because you're brought on board, sometimes you're even brought on board earlier, you share the same goals and priorities for the project as the architect, and you also have the opportunity to set the BIM plan up successfully, and you can really set it up to, do we want to utilize the model for all takeoff? Do we want to use it for specific systems? Where do we want to focus? So there's a lot of good conversation and opportunity there in that type of a situation to be able to capitalize on the model. And again, it's all about efficiency on the design side and efficiency on the takeoff side, on the estimating side.
I think, one of the things too, because of my background as an architect, when I moved over to the construction side more so, I had come from a pretty good stint of doing design build projects, so I think I became kind of numb, or just that's kind of my mindset was always around design build. And so when I had to come back around to doing projects that weren't design build and work in those other formats, it's a little striking at first, because you're like, wait a minute, you're not going to ask a question? What are you going to ask? It's already on paper, you're done. And so as it relates to getting into like a true BIM project, where a lot of times we get into a project and we use BIM even though it's not a contractual requirement. It's not doing anything. It's not a requirement from the owner. Nobody's asking for it. But we know in the long term it helps us with coordination, layout, all these other things that we do, even down to the MEPs, helping them be able to do more prefab and those kind of things. But it all goes back to the very beginning of the project and getting in, and even if it's a hard bid project, if we can at least sit down with the design team and talk just eye to eye, like how can we do this job really well? Get that, it's a relationship-based industry. It always has been. It's probably not going to change tomorrow. So, how we can work together and do that better, I think, is the key to every successful project I've ever been involved with.